Alright, hello there. I'm gonna give some brief thoughts on Russia attacking Ukraine, what it means. Um, okay, so, first off, it's really important to state that there's a lot of information that's missing from what we know and our motivations for being there. So, our involvement with Ukraine has always been a little, I shouldn't say always, has been a little bit shady for a long time. I think it goes all the way, I think it goes back to um, Hunter Biden being on that board for that energy company, which didn't make a lot of sense. There's clearly some ties between Biden and Ukraine, um, I don't think they make a lot of sense personally, and I think it certainly appears that there's some corruption there. Um, so you have to take that into account. I don't really trust our current administration at all. I don't trust um, the information that they are revealing about the situation. I don't trust our ties to Ukraine. I just have a lot of distrust for our government in general. So that needs to be taken into account. That being said, um, it is a very interesting situation with potentially catastrophic implications for the world, I guess. Um, I think this administration has looked incredibly weak so far, militarily and just in general. Biden obviously doesn't speak very well. He's incredibly old. Um, he's really just a very weak president. I mean, we saw it with Afghanistan. I think it was for sure the right idea to pull out, um, but we fucked it up majorly because Trump had set a date for when we were supposed to pull out, and then Biden didn't honor that, and he pulls out late, and then he does it. He rushes it too. I mean, if you're gonna delay it, sure, but at least make the right decisions, do it right. We left millions, maybe billions of dollars in military equipment behind, um, including technology that we definitely don't want our enemies to get their hands on. We looked incredibly weak. We gave up the airport in what was that airport called? We had a private airport. Um, let's see what it's called. Bagram. Yeah, it's the Bagram Air Base. It was. It made no fucking sense. We could have evacuated our troops a lot better. Anyway, the entire thing was a massive failure. It looked super weak, and I think the world saw that, and they're like, "Oh, the U.S. looks pretty weak here." And obviously, we've been incredibly strong military for an incredibly long time. So I think it was very telling, and in a very bad way, of this administration's lack of military expertise, and it just looked really bad. So so that needs to be taken into account. Now, Russia attacking Ukraine is pretty interesting because I think they're kind of testing on some level what they can get away with. Um, I think they're relatively confident that we're not going to put troops on the ground there. I think that's a really good assumption. We've already stated that we're going to respond with sanctions. Um, and obviously, sanctions can go a long way um, when you think about, the impacts of trade. Obviously, they're massive for any country. Um, but we're not going to put troops on the ground, very likely. So Russia has a very strong military force. They've got already some estimates like 200,000 troops in Ukraine. So I just don't see us being mustering enough of a response to make a difference unless us and a bunch of other NATO countries decide to contribute a bunch of troops and weapons to the effort. I just don't see where this will lead as to effectively deter Russia from doing this. Um, and I don't know um, the information as far as like Russia's saying that certain groups in eastern Ukraine have been calling for help. And I don't know if there's any truth to that. I do know that there was obviously a civil war in Ukraine a few years back, and there's live video footage you can find of people being killed there. Um, I don't know the Ukrainian politics super well. Obviously, that's going to influence it too, and whether there's any legitimacy to Putin's claims at all. It's a good question. I think part of the problem is, and I'm sure a lot of people can agree with this, I have so little trust in what our government says about things that how can I know that Russia is full of shit? You know, I mean, is Russia full of shit too, or is everyone just full of shit? Like, you know what I mean? Who's telling the truth? Is anyone are all parties to blame in some way, or like these are really good questions, and it's hard to say whether there should be it's justified to respond militarily from the U.S. perspective to this invasion because we've been the world police for an incredibly long time. I'm gonna move actually. Yeah, and does it really even make sense at this point? There's a lot of questions surrounding that. I mean, we don't even take good care of our own borders, making sure they're secure. So, do we really, can we really try to protect the borders of Ukraine, a country very, very far away, if we're not willing to take care of our own? I mean, there's some estimates that something like 2 million illegal immigrants have been coming across the border successfully in the last year. And that's not just Mexico, that's other countries in South America as well. Um, but it's just like, why are we're so happy to be the world police and protect other people's borders, but when it comes to our own, we're not. I mean, it seems a little ridiculous to me. Um, so it's pretty interesting. Um, and it's also interesting, like I'm reading things that like Russia's trying to um, or excuse me, NATO's trying to expand its alliances into more Eastern Europe, and Ukraine wants to join NATO, and Russia obviously is like not welcome into NATO. They're not being invited to join, kind of being pushed out. That's there's a lot of questions there. Like one thing that's a really good question is like, okay, so obviously Russia was did did some really heinous shit back in the day, like from basically the Soviet Union up to the end of the Soviet Union. Russia has been involved in a lot of shady stuff. But I mean, since then, I mean, there's a lot of questions like, can you really blame Russia for its bad history? Because we don't do it with Germany, right? I mean, we're definitely willing to forgive. We don't do it with Japan. We're definitely willing to forgive countries that have once been our enemies. Russia is no longer a communist nation. There are some authoritarian elements as far as just, Putin, being a consistent leader, bouncing back and forth between the two top power positions is sort of a loophole in the whole system. Yeah, don't get me wrong, there's certainly some abuse, arguably some abuse of power, uh, there and with that situation, but like, I mean, they're obviously a much better country than they used to be. Like they're not a communist state. I mean, is it really justified to hold their past against them at this point? I don't think the answer is yes. Um, and this is coming from someone who obviously doesn't have all the information, but like, what is it about Russia that we hate so much at this point? I really don't know the answer. I don't all the election fraud stuff that they were like interfering with the election, most of that was for sure just bullshit. Um, like yeah, okay, let's assume they were actually running some targeted Facebook ads. I looked into those ads. Like if people can be influenced by stuff like that, is that really election fraud? Like I didn't think it was clear, compelling evidence of election fraud at all. Like if people can be influenced by advertisements that really shouldn't be that influential, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't think that's constitutes election fraud, especially considering the amount of propaganda like ads that we run in our own country against candidates of the opposite sides. There's so much misinformation. You're allowed to lie about basically anything and anyone. So how can you accuse of Russia of election fraud when our corporate media has been lying to the American people consistently for such a long time? I mean, the amount of dishonesty that comes from like CNN, MSNBC, and these organizations, more so the left leaning organizations for sure. Um, Now, granted, I'm not particularly huge on Fox News. I mean, I do like Tucker Carlson. I think he has a lot of good things to say, but I'm not like a huge corporate media guy just in general. Um, but it is interesting that it's like, how can we accuse Russia of election fraud when I mean, it's, at least in the terms of like the context, because it was just, they were saying, oh, it was misinformation. You can't influence. You shouldn't be able. Another country shouldn't be able to influence citizens of our country with ads. But it's like, we could do that to ourselves, and I mean, we're already so willing and like people in corporate media are already so willing and ready to lie about the other party and candidates in the other party that it's like, I just don't think that's that big of a deal. I really don't. Um, so I think that should be taken into account. I just don't understand why we have these massive issues with Russia at this point. Like, for sure, everything was justified during the Cold War. I think there's a really compelling argument for trying to deter communism. So trying to stop. Maybe I should look at the camera. I don't know. Trying to stop the spread of communism. I mean, communism, in my eyes, is for sure a terrible thing. Um, it like, look at all the worst regimes in the history of the world, and they were all authoritarian communist. Basically, all of them. Mao Zedong's China, current China, Xi Jinping. Um, I mean, Mao Zedong responsible for roughly 55 million deaths in his own country. Xi Jinping currently enslaving um, some estimates say about 2 to 4 million Uyghur Muslims, harvesting organs, killing off that population. Obviously, they have a brutal mistreatment of anyone who speaks out against the party, journalists, even scientists, people who leaked some of the first COVID stuff, just made to disappear. I mean, China's 100% still just an absolutely terrible uh, regime, the Chinese Communist Party. You have North Korea, Kim Jong Un, um, maybe the worst country ever to ever exist in the history of the world. If you follow Yeonmi Park's stories about her escape and just living what it's like living in North Korea, you'll probably never hear anything worse in your entire life. Just the most horrendous stories of mistreatment, malnourishment, lack of food, lack of control for making any decisions, lack of trust for even your family members, friends, because everyone is so brainwashed by the administration that um, they are unwilling to speak out in any capacity. I mean, it's really really scary stuff what's going on there. Um, and then you have obviously Soviet Union. You have the Gulag of Archipelago. What is going on in this hand? Does he have aces? Okay. Um, the Gulag of Archipelago, obviously, which is like the Soviet internment camps, um, basically in the Soviet Union in the 1920s to 1930s. People were really afraid to speak their minds because it was a severe regime, very authoritarian, and people were just being pulled out of their homes in the middle of the night and sent to these prison camps, and they were just unbelievably horrendous. Some estimates are like 20 to like 40 million people died in the Soviet Union over a few years just because of everything that was going on. You have Pol Pot in Cambodia. Uh, these like took down all the media, isolate like just basically stripped down all the fucking um, the power and um, Cambodia was just a horrible country responsible for millions of deaths, and it's a small country. I mean, the amount of um, chaos that he was responsible for is pretty crazy. So yeah, just basically every regime um, that's been communist authoritarian has killed millions of people pretty much for the most part. So I think it's totally fine to um, try to combat communism and stop the spread. I mean, look at what's going on right now with China. Obviously, they've got their eyes on Taiwan. I 100% think that we should carry a tremendous amount about that and be willing to uh, yield our wield our full military power to protecting Taiwan. And I really think we should be, I mean, making that, I guess, more known. But like, we should 100% care about Taiwan way more than Ukraine. But we should. I mean, I'm not saying we shouldn't care about both, but Taiwan's just much more important to our interests, to our immediate interests by far. It's not even close. Russia's not even remotely the level of threat that China is, both long term and short term. Not even Russia doesn't have close to the GDP. Russia does not have the same level of military, at least that China will have. Um, so we should 100% be incredibly concerned about China taking Taiwan and be ready to respond drastically. Um, Taiwan is responsible for producing most of the computer chips in the world, um, and if China were to have control of that market, it could have actually a lot of big implications. I mean, they'd basically have a monopoly on trade for just computer chips in general. And I know those chips also are used for cars and other things. They're incredibly important. Um, and also, it's just you know, it's about you know, Taiwan wants to be a democratic state. My understanding is that the old government of China fled to Taiwan back in the day when the Chinese Communist Party was taking power, and they just stayed there. And it's a democratic state, and it's a good place to live. So it's like it's very symbolic actually of just protecting democracy, um, and combating communism. Um, so I think 100% that's something that we should be very focused on and make sure that we um, respond appropriately to. So yeah, there's a lot of big implications with Russia invading Ukraine. For one, China could get a little bit more confident and maybe try to take Taiwan. This would be a perfect opportunity to do so, because it would mean that the U.S. is spread thin if we're willing to respond militarily to both. Um, and what the fuck is going on here? Sorry, 1 second. And then yeah, basically, like, China and Russia can 100% work closely together on this and either help each other or try to invade at like the same time. What the fuck is going on in this man? Fuck me, man. Are you kidding me? How does he have it? Whatever. I mean, that would just be the smart move, tactically speaking. Would be them both making military moves at the same time or helping one another, forming, a stronger alliance. I've heard talks of Iran maybe making moves or like sort of joining China and Russia and some sort of alliance. I mean, obviously it would make sense for them to do so. I don't want that to happen. I think most people don't want that to happen, but if you're just looking at it from a peer strategy perspective, that would be the right decision. So there's just a lot of crazy shit that can happen because of this. NATO's is definitely going to probably respond somehow, sanctions, maybe militarily, maybe Ukraine's ready to respond military, maybe we fund them weapons, maybe um, I don't know. Russia said that they don't want to occupy the land, but they obviously want access to that port. What is that port called? Ukraine port Russia wants. Oh, what is that? Port, is it Odessa? I think it's Odessa. Basically, I think my understanding is that a lot of Russian trade goes through the port of Odessa, and they have to pay a bunch of money in like I don't know whatever like tariffs or stuff like that. I don't know exactly what their how it works, but if Russia could just control that port and didn't have to go through Ukraine, it would make it a lot easier for them. So just economically, it would be a massive gain to control that territory. Um, so it makes a lot of sense why they would want that. Um, I don't remember what I was. Anyway, yeah. So we'll see what happens. I don't think Russia cares about occupying most of Ukraine, taking it over. Um, I think Russia's incredibly smart. I think Putin's incredibly smart, and I think he knows exactly what he's doing, exactly what he wants from this. So I guess we'll have to see what happens, but I wouldn't be surprised if Russia's willing to just settle for taking a small amount of land, trying to control that port, and just kind of leaving the rest be. I mean, we will have to see, obviously, but I think that would make a lot of sense, just tactically speaking. Um, they don't want to. They don't want to push the envelope too much. I mean, it's not going to be like Hitler just trying to conquer a bunch of land. I mean, they know their fucking limits. Um, so yeah, we'll have to see what happens, but definitely not a good situation. Um, fuck, really. So yeah, that's all for now. Um, we'll have to see what the U.S. does, but yeah. Anyway, thank you for tuning in.